Hello, today I'm here to set out to read my most overdue library books. These are all of the books that I currently have taken out that are unread, starting at the top, most overdue, to least overdue. I'm not going to read all of these in this video, but I'm going to see how many of them I can get through. So, number one, absolute most overdue. This is a fast read, so it's a 7-day loan, and I took it out on January 1st, and it is January 29th today. This is so overdue, it has been marked as lost, and I have been billed for it. So we gotta get to this one, like, really bad. I don't actually have to pay any fees as long as I take it back, but if my other books get billed, then I'll be over the $40 limit, and then I won't be able to take more books out until I return them. So this is like, it's kind of urgent. Small Things Like These is by Claire Keegan, and she wrote Foster. This should be a book that I can read in like an hour and a half. It's really, her books are really small. The font is huge. And the margins are big. Like, there's just not very many words in this book. I don't know. I think that's why I haven't gotten to it yet, because I'm like, oh, I can do that easy. I can do that just like in 2 hours. I'll be done with that. So it just like has never made it to the top of my list. Then we have Woman Eating by Claire Kohda. I also have this on audiobook, and I'm like most of the way through the audiobook, so I know I'll be able to finish this. This is about a vampire. Then we have Boulder. This is some sort of lesbian tale that's supposed to be written in really beautiful language. And then No One Is Talking About This. This I'm partway through. It's interesting. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it yet. I either love it or hate it. Then The Memory Police. I don't know why I haven't picked this up, because I want to read it so bad. And if I bring this back to the library without reading it, it'll be a long time until I get it again, because the holds list is long, which is another reason I have to get to this. This is not overdue yet. I do not like having overdue books that other people are waiting for. It feels so rude. Which, I know I just said that I have a book marked as lost, but technically no one is waiting for the fast reads, because you can't put a fast reads on hold. You can only like pick it up in person at the library. So no one on the list, I'm not screwing any of them over with that one. Then I have Love Novel, which is translated from Croatian, and I think it says love in late capitalism. This couple just like kind of falls apart. I think it's really intense. And then It Would Be Night in Caracas. This is kind of like a dystopian novel, something about Venezuela, where it's like kind of a dystopian world but kind of not. I'm interested in reading this, seeing if I'm still into dystopian books like I was when I was 12. It's been a long time since I've read any dystopian novels. Maybe I still like that. I kind of think it's a 12-year-old thing, but how would I really know? And then we have Die My Love, which is about a woman who is like kind of losing it. I started this book and I just wasn't in the mood for it. It's also not overdue, so I don't think I'll get to this. This is the stack. Who knows what I'm going to read? Probably the ones that were on top. I don't know. I don't know how many I'll get to here, but I'm going to go start with that. And before I do that, I am going to tell you to join my book club. Join the book club. It's the perfect time for me to tell you this. February is just starting. We are reading Jillian by Hallie Butler. We have all heard actually really bad things about it. Apparently people do not like this book. My partner read it first, so don't blame me if it's bad. But also, wouldn't it be fun to talk about a book that we all hate? It's going to be interesting no matter what. You can come and join for free, or you can join a paid tier. Do whatever you want to do. Get in the Discord. We're having so much fun, and we want you to be there with us, okay? Okay. And maybe I'll even talk about one of these books on Patreon instead of here. Like, maybe I'll tease it. Ooh, is that a good idea? I'll be like, oh, I read this book, but I'm not going to talk about it on YouTube. If you want to hear me talk about it, you're going to have to go to Patreon. I think I'm going to do that. Okay, bye. So I was right. Small Things Like These took almost no time at all to read. It was a really good book. I love Claire Keegan's writing style. And I really like that she writes short books, because I think that they would be boring if they weren't like 80 pages long. That makes it really easy to finish them. So Small Things might have been nicer if I had read it in the days leading up to Christmas, which I didn't, because this very specifically takes place in the days leading up to Christmas in 1985 in a small Irish town, and it follows this man who's like a coal merchant. He delivers coal to the people of the town. This man, Bill Furlong, he has a wife and he has 5 daughters. He was raised by a single mother until she died when he was 12, and he always lived at the house of this woman, Mrs. Wilson, who kind of took care of him and his mother. And right from the jump, he's shown to be a kind and empathetic man. In one of the first conversations that happens in this book, Bill is talking to his wife, and he's talking about how he met one of the neighborhood kids on the road and he gave him a few coins that he had in his pocket. And this kid acted like he had given him $100. And the wife is saying some of these people bring hardship on themselves. And Bill says, surely not the kid, though. Like, surely it isn't his fault. And she's like, well, it is his father's fault. He needs to stop drinking. And Bill says, well, maybe he's not able to. He's just, like, understanding and kind and generous. On Christmas Eve, he's doing his coal run. It's bitterly cold, and he finds a woman barefoot, surrounded by her own feces in the coal shed of the nunnery or the convent or whatever. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about religion. This convent has a mother and baby home, which is, if you don't know, a really dark part of Ireland's history. They were these church and state-sponsored homes where young mothers were sent and where a lot of babies died and a lot of abuse happened. This woman is locked inside this coal shed, and he is kind of cowardly, and he takes her back to the nuns, and they have this kind of really tense, weird conversation where the nuns are like, oh, how did she end up out there? Oh, that's so strange. And then she like gives Bill a little bit of money. It's like weird and icky. It's obvious that this woman is being abused by these nuns, and that they know that Bill knows, and they're just trying to like get him out of there but also keep up appearances. And Bill can't stop thinking about this woman, and so he ends up going back, and she's there in the coal shed again, and he takes her out and he brings her home. And the book ends with him walking through town with her barefoot, taking her back to his home with his wife, and kind of like, in some ways he's kind of like thinking about how good of a guy he is, but it's not in a way that is like upsetting or horrible or makes you think he's like a piece of shit or like has a savior complex. And then also in lots of ways he's worrying about what next. Like, he has just taken in this girl. It's not like he and his family have a lot of money. He says at the end, whatever suffering he was now to meet was a long way from what the girl at his side had already endured and might yet surpass. And, you know, he's also relating the story of this woman with his mother, who probably would have been sent to one of these homes were it not for this woman, Mrs. Wilson, who had taken care of them. I think this book is kind of like a sweet little slice of life. It obviously deals with some heavy topics, but it does so with like grace and tenderness. I think it's incredibly introspective, particularly for how short it is, like 115 pages, and it feels like you really know this character and understand who he is and how he thinks and where he's come from. And it also very quickly establishes the dynamics of this town and of the people around him. And it's all done through very beautiful writing. There's like great sharp dialogue that I love. They speak with the Irish affect. I like Irish lit fic, and I like it when people speak like Irish people in it, and they don't just speak like a British person or like literally like an American. Like, I like when it is very specific to a place, and this creates a fantastic atmosphere. It's so immersive, particularly with the way Keegan builds up this sense of like this ever encroaching cold, this bitter cold, but at the same time this tranquility and like serene quality, which I think sort of matches up with the way Bill is feeling. Like, he is a man who is worked to the bone, and he feels that, but when he's able to live in the present moment, he is very appreciative and content in his life with his family, and that just goes hand in hand with the way the atmosphere is set out. And this feeling of the cold always like coming after you, like right on your tail, is great for letting us know how this woman who is in this shed feels, because we don't really ever see anything from her perspective or even hear much like conversation from her. She's very traumatized. I think it was a great little book. I think it was worth reading. I definitely think if you kind of want to read it but you don't care all that much, save it for next Christmas, because it's like very much Christmas vibes, and I think reading it a month after Christmas was maybe a little bit of a weird choice. I do think that her book Foster is a little bit better than this. I just really liked Foster, and I felt like I was so connected to the characters in that book, whereas this one, maybe it was the speed that I read it, but like I understood Bill Furlong, but I don't feel like I cared about him all that much. So now that I'm done small things like these, the one that I really needed to finish, I am planning on finishing up the audiobook for Woman Eating by Claire Kohda. The problem is I'm not going to touch the physical copy of it, so I'm not like taking notes. I don't really know what I think about this book. I still have not been able to grasp how to review an audiobook. I just think of it as so different from reading physically. It's just such a completely different experience for me that it makes it really hard for me to know how to talk about the writing and the pacing and the tone and the plot. So I will come and talk to you about this book, but I can't promise that I'll have very much to say about it. I wish that I could. I feel like I'm judging the performance and not the writing, and I don't know how to like get down into the writing when I'm listening to an audiobook. So I don't know. I'll talk to you later. Hello, it is freezing fucking cold in my room. I have finished the audiobook for Woman Eating, though I am holding the physical copy of it in front of you, and I'm going to try my best to come up with things to say about it. But it's going to be difficult. I usually listen to audiobooks like on the way to and from school. I don't really like dedicate a lot of my time to them. It's just like if I'm out and about or I'm on the bus, I listen to it. So I listened to this over quite a long period of time. I've just finished it now. So like I don't remember anything. Woman Eating follows a vampire, Lydia, who's like I think 24 years old. She's only lived for 24 years. Like she is immortal, but she hasn't lived an immortal life, where her mom I think was like hundreds of years old. Her mom kind of has like the vampire version of dementia, so she has been put into a home, and her father wasn't a vampire and he's dead, so she's in a way orphaned. So the book starts with her living on her own for the first time after putting her mom into a nursing home, and she lives in this like studio place. I think she has an apartment and a studio space here. It's like a collective of art people living in this building. And the book begins with her being shown to her apartment by this guy, Ben. Now, I was not listening, I guess, because I thought Ben was like her landlord. He's kind of just like another guy who lives there. I don't know why he is the one giving her papers to sign, but they go up into this apartment and she's like, damn, Ben's kind of cute. And they're kind of like flirting a little bit. She doesn't like light. She says it gives her a headache, but actually it just like irritates her skin a little bit. So they're in this apartment. It's dark. She's being like weird as fuck. Like she's like, can we sign the papers in the pitch black? And he's like, okay. And so he points on the paper where she needs to sign, and she can see perfectly fine in the dark. But instead of doing that, like instead of just signing where she needs to sign, she finds his hand in the dark and holds it and then signs from there. That's the kind of flirtation that's happening. She's about to start this internship at some museum of some sort, and she also really needs blood. She can live for a long time without feeding, but it destroys her. Like she's exhausted, her body feels terrible. She has no blood in her body, and she needs pig's blood. That's what she's been eating her whole life. That's what her mom always sourced. They don't eat humans. So she goes to a butcher. She has moved out of the town that she lived in with her mom, where they had a deal with the butcher there where they got buckets of pig's blood and they lived off of it. She cannot stomach any human food. All she can eat is blood. So she goes to this butcher. She says, can I get this and that and this and that and this and that? And then also, do you happen to have some pig's blood? And he's like, what are you talking about? She's like, I'm a performance artist. And he's like, get out of here. We don't do that shit here. So she doesn't go anywhere. She can't find pig's blood anywhere. I think she's talking about how there's like laws and regulations in the UK that means that the sale of pig's blood is not legal, or at the very least it is highly regulated. So she has no food. She's living off of nothing, and she can't, like I said, she can live for a very long time, like years and years like this. It's just miserable. But as the book goes on, she is getting hungrier and hungrier and hungrier, and also she is being kind of like harassed by the boss at her internship. His name is Gideon. He sees her for the first time and he's like, I know your dad, because her dad was a painter. He's like, I collect your dad's paintings. And so she's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like now I'm thinking about my dad. And then he gropes her. And it kind of seems like everyone's kind of like, stay away from Gideon. He's a bit of a creep. It's like he's known to be this creepy man who takes advantage of his power and assaults the young women interning at his work. So as this woman, who I don't think I've told you her name, it's Lydia. As Lydia is getting more and more hungry, she's like looking at living creatures and feeling their blood, feeling what it would be like to taste their blood. And as this is happening, she also tries to order dried pig's blood online, and then it gets shipped to the wrong spot, so she can't actually get it, and she's freaking out outside of her apartment building. And then Ben, the guy who who showed her the apartment, he shows up and he's like, are you okay? She's like, oh yeah, it's just the anniversary of my mom's death. And he's like, oh, that sucks. I can kind of relate. Like my mom has cancer, she's in palliative care. And Lydia's like, fuck, my mom's not actually dead. Like, maybe I shouldn't have lied about that. So the two of them are kind of like empathizing with each other. And then she notices that she can smell blood. And she's like, are you okay? And she looks down and he has blood on him. And he has like been in a bike accident. He's fine. He's just kind of got like some gravel in his thigh. I think he was like doored by a car. She's like, let me help you with this. I'll take you upstairs. I'll clean you up. They go upstairs and her hunger is insatiable. She wants his blood. And she obviously can't just like start drinking this man's blood. So she's just trying her best to very calmly and like collectedly keep her cool and help pick the gravel out of his wound. Why am I holding knitting needles? They're also like, I bet they're making a noise. Sorry. She like sops up some of his blood with a towel, and then she's kind of getting closer and closer and closer to it until all of a sudden she is like kissing the wound on his thigh. And he goes, Lydia, I actually have a girlfriend. Sorry, I didn't mean to like confuse things. But by the way, he's been like asking her on dates. So it's a little bit weird that he hasn't mentioned this beforehand, but he does say, I have a girlfriend. Can you please stop kissing the wound on my leg? And she is so embarrassed. She runs out of there. And when she runs out of there, she's holding the towel covered in his blood. She obviously spends the night sucking his blood out of this towel. The two of them end up kind of getting over it. She makes friends with the people who live in this building, all of the other artists there, but the rest of the book is mostly about her struggling both with her hunger and with her identity and her connection to her past and to her parents' heritages. Lydia is mixed race, both in like the human sense and in the sense that she is part demon and part human, and it contrasts these two things in a way that is pretty subtle. It's not very preachy, but it is a very interesting way to look at it. And also in grappling with her hunger and the ensuing like weakness and illness that is coming because she's so fucking hungry, she is grappling with her demon side and figuring out what makes her human. Like, are any parts of her human? Is she all demon? Is the demon like a little voice in her head, or is it her? That kind of thing. At one point, she finds a duck at the river and she either kills it or it's already dead, and then she drains it of all its blood and she drinks the duck blood, and she leaves the duck in her sink for like a few days. Like, it's got maggots on it. And then Ben comes over, they have sex. The lights come on because her lights are always off because she's sensitive to light because she's a vampire. Lights come on. He's like, oh my god, ew, there's a fucking dead duck drained of blood in your sink. I'm getting out of here. This is truly the worst summary I have ever done ever because I take notes and I didn't take any fucking notes on this. I was listening to it on the bus and I get car sick, so I could not take any fucking notes. So I don't know how we get here, but at the end of it, she is so hungry. She's like looking at people's necks and seeing the blood beating in their veins. And so she's like, maybe I could stomach a little bit of human food. So she goes to the communal fridge and she drinks like an entire gallon of milk. And then her blood is now milk. Like, she's filled with, that's so stupid. It's not stupid when you're reading it, but she's filled up with milk now, and it makes her incredibly ill. She's hallucinating her mother. She's like so sick. And people find her on the ground, obviously very ill and actively hallucinating and like speaking out loud to people who aren't there. They get Ben in, they're like, we gotta take you to the hospital. She's like, no, I'll be okay, I just had some bad milk. And Ben's like, well, I smelled the milk and it was fine. Like, are you sure you're not on drugs? And she's like, I'm not on drugs, I'm okay, like, I'll be fine. Then something happens. I don't know what. I think this is after they've had sex and they haven't talked about how they had sex, and their sexual experience was really intense for Lydia. I think it was her first time, and she understood why her mom told her never to have sex, because when vampires have sex with humans, it's this intense thing where it like gives them life in a way. Like, she felt like her hunger for blood had been satiated and that she was kind of like sucking Ben's life out of him a little bit. I don't know if it was marked by a loss on Ben's part, but she did gain something from it, like physically. And she's sick on the ground, and I think they're talking about how, I mean, Ben has cheated on his girlfriend, and Ben says, we can't do this, like, it was a mistake. And Lydia gets really upset, and so she goes just back to her apartment. Or I think she squeezes her hands and she cuts through her own skin, and then Ben sees that milk is leaking out of her hands, and he gets really stressed out, and she runs away back to her apartment, and he's like, Lydia, I'm really worried, we have to go to the doctor. She's like, I'll be fine, I just need some time, just leave me alone. He ends up leaving her alone, and during this time she can like feel his blood beating on the other side of the door. This whole book, she is hungry for Ben, and you think she's gonna kill Ben. Oh my god, she's gonna fucking drink Ben's blood. And I personally wanted her to. She doesn't, but she does go out into the night, and she just kind of walks around until a man approaches her like nastily. Like, he is approaching her being a fucking disgusting man, and she drains him of all of his blood. Just chomps right down, sucks his blood out of him, and she is, I mean, this is her first like real feeding in months. She feels so strong. She feels so good. She's like, I need more of this. So she just starts walking, and she ends up in front of her place of work, like where she's interning. And as she gets there, this guy, Gideon, is there, and he exits the door. He sees her. He says, hi. She bares her teeth at him, and she eats him. As soon as you see that it's Gideon there, you're like, oh, she's going to eat Gideon. Like, fuck yes. I think she goes and eats another man, and then the book ends with her getting back to the apartment. Ben is there. He sees her in the shadows, like lurking, and she's covered in fucking blood. She kisses him and she decides not to eat him or turn him into a vampire. She decides to leave him there with his small, beautiful life and go somewhere else. Listen, I know I am missing so much from this book because I listened to it. I don't think that audiobooks, don't get me wrong, I don't think audiobooks are like a lesser form of reading or anything like that. For me, I cannot pay attention to an audiobook in the same way as I can with a book. I have auditory processing issues. I have attention issues. I have like understanding what's going on issues. And that means that it's really tricky for me to grasp like what is between the words here, what's between the lines. Any symbolism, I have literally no idea. I will not catch that shit. The major themes even, like, I don't really know what's going on with that. I think this book was good. I think it was pretty fast paced. It could be a little bit slow in the beginning. I felt like all of the characters were flat. Even Lydia, even though we're inside her head the whole time, she was a little bit flat. I liked the way it did vampires. I think that was the strongest part of this book, is it does vampires in this very like I don't know. It strikes this balance where it's not like so overly stereotypical that it's tired, but it's also not trying to be something like really new and different so that it's like cringe. I think it was fun. I think the ending was cathartic. I can't tell you if the writing was good or not. The performance of the audiobook was really good. She had like a really nice British accent, which is always my favorite with audiobooks. I don't know. I think it was good. I think the dialogue also felt pretty natural. At least the way she was reading it felt really natural. I think that I liked this enough as an audiobook that I kind of regret listening to it as an audiobook. I'm sure I would have enjoyed this book, and I now will never know because I'm never gonna read a book that I already know everything that happens in because I'm so spoiler averse. So that's Woman Eating by Claire Kohda. I'm sorry I don't have more to say about this. I wish that I did, but I really just don't. I'm sitting here grasping at straws. I'm trying so hard to come up with a thought about this book. I have nothing. So that's that. I am going to go and finish No One Is Talking About This. No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, and then I will talk to you about it when I'm done. Hello, I'm sitting here to talk to you about some books. I have somewhat been avoiding this for the past couple of days because I need to talk to you about No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. The irony doesn't escape me, but I'm not going to linger on it because that was not an intended pun, and I'm feeling kind of bad about myself for saying it regardless. This book, I'm afraid I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm really, like, I don't even want to think about it anymore. I'll talk to you about what happens in it first, and then I will talk about my feelings and my thoughts. Because wow. So this is a book in 2 parts, and it also is a book with not really like a linear narrative. It's just these little fragments, and they do form a somewhat cohesive story, but mostly it's just like her musings on her life and what's going on around her. In part 1, particularly about social media. So this follows our narrator who has gone viral because of a ridiculous tweet, "Can a dog be twins?" And now she's invited to speaking engagements all around the world where she talks about the internet and social media, which she calls the portal. But don't get too caught up on the portal language because this is not in any way like science fiction, which I think I kind of took from that reading the summary. This is very much set in like our present day, our world. Well, maybe not our present day. Maybe it's set in like, it feels like kind of like 2017, and it's written by someone. It's like the great Twitter novel in the first half. It's written by someone who's very clearly deeply online. And if you are online or were at the time this book is kind of set, you will understand a lot of the references in here. It's a lot of just like joking around and also like talking about the very real and tangible effect that social media has on our psyches. And it's very much written by a woman who is a poet. So it's not written by a poet in the way that it's like very flowery language or like ornate writing. It's more written by a poet in its introspectiveness, which I think is really interesting. It's both timeless and very specifically set in a time and a place, and that makes it overly familiar. Like, I just recognize this. I recognize everything in here. And it's just so fucking funny in this first half. It's funny throughout the whole thing, surprisingly, we'll get to it, but it is so funny. And I think it wouldn't be funny if it was told in a typical way, like in a very linear narrative kind of story. I think she also says something in here about how this story is written in this disjointed, fragmentary style, where she says, like, why is everybody writing like this right now? Is it because this is what the portal wants, or is it because this is how the portal speaks? Like, it is kind of like reading a Twitter feed from 2017. I'm gonna read to you some of the things that I think are funniest. I'll start with the one that's just ridiculous and funny. And I feel like she has such a good grasp on tweets that would go viral, or like truly the way people talk on the internet. She just knows it. Like a Can a Dog Be Twins? I can absolutely see that being a viral tweet that shoots someone into like stardom for speaking about the internet. Okay, this one's just funny. She was ovulating and posted a photo of herself in a bikini with the disturbing caption, "God's little dog treat." That's so fucking stupid. God's little dog treat is like maybe my favorite thing ever. And then this one I think is more telling about the commentary that she's making on the internet and internet culture, and also it's so funny. You kind of have to get to the end of it, so just like hold out through this. How are we supposed to write now that we could no longer compare anything to a phantom limb? Was the phrase "the braille of her nipples" to be absolutely retired? Were we just never to say that someone inclined her head like a geisha ever again? Could we not call the weather bipolar without risking the prison of public opinion? Not imply that birdwatchers are autistic? Could we not say that the crescent moon was as slender as a poor person? Not say that the sun crashed inevitably into the mountains like a woman driver? There's just like this sense of irony and also earnestness imbued within the entire thing. She's making commentary and she's making fun of people, but she's also making you think. It's great. It's wonderful. It does take a little bit to get into, and also like some of the humor falls flat. Like I said, this is both timeless and set in a specific time, and when it's really set in that time, sometimes it's like a little bit cringe. It's like, oh yeah, that's a joke from like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But I think that sense of cringe also in some ways makes it a little bit endearing. Okay, then we get into part 2. I've seen people say that this book has 2 very distinct parts, almost like it's 2 books, and I think that is in some ways diminishing what she's doing here, because these parts are intricately linked. They are absolutely tied to each other, but there is a very tangible tone shift. And that happens when her mother texts her that there is something wrong with her younger sister's pregnancy. This pregnancy has been something that they have been kind of delighted about. There's been like questions about bringing a child into this world. A lot of this book is about like the state of the world and the climate crisis and everything going on. And there's been like many texts about the world, if the world's still here when she gets here, that kind of thing. There's something wrong with this pregnancy that is very much wanted. It's important to note here that both of her parents are religious. I think her dad more extremely so, and I think that he has fallen into right-wing politics. He's an ex-cop. He very staunchly does not believe in abortion rights. Now, what the doctors are telling this family is that this baby is probably not going to survive birth. She has an incredibly rare, like 1 in a billion genetic condition that is not really compatible with life. At the same time, there's a new law passed in Ohio that means that birth cannot be induced before 37 weeks. So this baby is putting her mother at risk, and also they can't abort her. And the narrator, she fights with her father, who still believes that abortions should be illegal. And even looking at his daughter, he goes like, well, maybe there should be some exceptions. But then in the same breath, he's like, they use these exceptions as an excuse. It's very frustrating, and there's a lot of anger. So I think the tone that's set up here is going into the birth of this baby, we're not expecting her survival, but we are very concerned about the survival of her mother, the narrator's younger sister. And then the baby does survive. She just doesn't die and doesn't die and doesn't die. And then this book becomes a story of love and grief, because there is so much fucking love for this baby. Now, she is profoundly disabled. She's blind, and they also don't really know, like the doctors have been telling them that her brain's capacity is incredibly limited. Like, they're not sure if she lives a life that she would even be able to count to 3. Like, they really don't know what it is that she can understand or what it is that she can learn. And this book really grapples with that. Like, it's full of questions about what it means to be conscious, what it means to be alive, what it means to have a brain, what it means to have thoughts. And they are kind of like learning this baby's capabilities as they get to know her over the course of her, spoiler, very short life. Like, I cannot exaggerate enough how much this family loves this fucking baby. And yes, it is a task. She needs 24/7 care. Like, she often forgets to breathe, and they have to like pinch her to remind her that she needs to breathe. She needs to be watched over constantly. And this does absolutely take a toll on her mother. And yet they would do it forever. Her mom says that I would have done it forever. They love this baby, and all they want to do is spend time with this baby. Now, for me personally, this is absolutely, like, both objectively and subjectively a sad story, and I can recognize that. I don't know if it was told in a different way, if it would have affected me as much as it did, because this story affected me more than anything I can remember reading, honestly, since Stone Butch Blues. Like, that was a story that put me in a dark fucking place. I have not sobbed this hard at a story since then, and that was years ago. Like, sometimes I'll tear up. That's kind of a feat for a book to get me to tear up. I was genuinely, like, head in my hands sobbing at this book, and it's not necessarily because of the content of the story of the story of this baby's life. It's because of how she talks about it, and even then, that's not quite the whole story. It's not like that it's spoken about very beautifully. It's more the things that she focuses on, and the insights, and the, again, like, introspection that she has into talking about this baby and talking about the love for this baby, and, you know, all of these questions about what this baby's life and experience is like and how different it is from theirs. So I started crying, I think 50 or 60 pages from the end of this book, and I didn't stop. Oh my god. Wow. I'm just gonna, like, read you some things that really got to me. I'll start with the one that got to me the most, and every time I would stop crying, I would think back to this line and I would start crying again. So already on this page, I think that it's setting you up to be sad. I had those few tears shed because it says something about her sister looking like her very young self again for a moment. And as an older sibling, like, wow, that was evocative. That made me sad. But then the book says, there was almost no human being so unlike other human beings that it did not know what a kiss was. I'm not going to cry while recording a YouTube video, but I'll be thinking about that for the rest of my life. What a profound insight into, like, disability and life and love. No one is so different that they don't know what a kiss is. Okay, then we also have, one day they had the idea to hold a toy piano up to her bare feet, and at the first note she struck, she uttered a sound of wild outrage that they had been letting her kick against air and nothingness when she could have been kicking against music this whole time. So, as everyone kind of expects, the baby dies after 6 months and 1 day of life. And they feel so lucky to have had her for those 6 months. And when she dies, everyone in the room is just holding her and telling her, you did such a good job. This is right at the end of the book. There's a funeral, and the last part that I'm going to read you is when they come home from the funeral. And she says, they came home, and her brother-in-law knelt down and kissed it, the square of couch where she had lived, where she had lain among the machines, where they had discovered, almost too late, that they could play patty cake with her. Give me a minute. I'm not going to be vulnerable on YouTube. So this was one of the most impactful and sad and beautiful books that I've ever read. I have never read anything with so much love imbued into it. Like, there is just so much love for this baby and in this family. Wow, it is gorgeous. There's obviously such a jarring shift in tone here, and this shift from ironic to sincere, and there's also a shift in how the narrator relates to the portal. It's not the same relationship anymore. She can't really, like, lose herself online after what happens with her niece. I think that this is a really hard book to recommend. I have no one in my life to recommend this to. I was, while sobbing in my partner's arms while reading this, I was explaining what happened in this book, and I was making other people cry just by saying what, like, was making me upset, not even by reading this book. So I don't think I'm going to get my partner to read it after that experience, because, wow, it's impossible for me to think of who I could recommend this to in my life. I think you need to be of a certain age, you need to be pretty online, and then I think anyone will find something in this last part, but I think that the first part is just as important as the second one. I absolutely loved this, more than I can really explain. I think that I will be thinking about this book for probably years to come. It was heartbreaking, impactful, gorgeous, insightful, and just, like, really well written. It was clearly written by a poet, but not in a way that was annoying. I couldn't recommend this enough, but I don't know who to recommend it to. If it sounds good to you, I think you should fucking read it right now. Go. So then I read The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, and I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to tell you have to go to my Patreon to go and see what I have to say about this book. Tell me if that's scummy. No, don't actually. So the next book I'm going to read is Boulder. Now, I really have to read this book because I already told you that Foster was marked as lost. As I have been making this video, Woman Eating and also Boulder have been marked as lost as well. And so that means that I cannot currently take out any more library books because my fees are at like $90 and $40 is the limit. So it's getting really bad. I really have to get these back to the library. This is so small. I think I will be able to read this over the day today. So probably when I see you next, it will be dark and orange in here. My camera was freaking the fuck out earlier, so I'm really hoping it's not going to do that now. It might look a little bit different. I hope that it looks okay. Maybe I should look up the pronunciation of this author's name. Excuse me? What are you doing? What does that mean? Does anyone know what that means? It's honestly, it can be so hard to find authors pronouncing their own name.
Hi, all of you. Thanks.
How does Willow pronounce it? Come on, Willow. Get to it. Okay, so basically, she pronounces it exactly how you would expect it to be pronounced, so I'm going to say that. Hello, it's a couple hours later, and I have finished Boulder by Eva Baltasar, and I'm going to tell you about it. This follows a queer lesbian couple through their journey into motherhood and how it destroys their relationship. So it starts 10 years in the past with our narrator, who is nicknamed Boulder by her girlfriend that she hasn't met yet, Samsa, and she's working as a cook on a boat in South America. She's horny as fuck. She has not felt the touch of a woman in many years, and it's all she can think about. She meets this woman, Samsa, while she's docked, and they meet up every time her boat docks, and they fall in love. And then one day, Samsa says, I'm leaving. I'm going to Iceland. And then it cuts to the next chapter, and they're in Iceland together. Boulder has followed her there. Now, it establishes this is a very short book. It establishes their relationship incredibly quickly. You understand the passion and the desire between them within 5 pages. It's very economical, but it's not the really efficient writing that is often associated with that descriptor. It is gorgeous, not super flowery, but very filled with metaphors and similes. It just, I think, does a really good job of getting you into their relationship really quickly. And they settle down in Iceland, and Boulder doesn't really want this. She kind of shuns a lot of aspects of a traditional life, like settling down in one place, owning a home, and having children. And she also really covets having things that she feels like are her own. And that's something that you know about her right from the jump. Samsa comes to her one day and she says, I want a baby. And Boulder tries to say, give me time. I mean, she doesn't want a baby, and she wants to at least have time to think about it. Samsa won't even give her a week of time. She says, I'm going to be 40 soon. We're running out of time. I want to have a baby. And Boulder knows that despite not wanting a baby, if she doesn't agree to having a baby with Samsa, it's the same thing as leaving her. And the only thing she wants less than a baby is to leave Samsa. So through rounds of, I think, IVF and artificial insemination, Samsa becomes pregnant. And thank God she is not pregnant with twins. Boulder is so relieved to hear that it's just one baby. And this pregnancy really changes Samsa, and it changes their relationship. Samsa becomes very, not controlling, but she kind of directs everything. She is in charge, and she devotes herself to her pregnancy and to this baby. Motherhood is something that Samsa really, really values, and she throws herself entirely into it. Whereas Boulder, again, doesn't want a baby. The baby is born at their home, everything is fine, and Boulder feels really excluded. It kind of just becomes this thing where it's Samsa and the baby, and Boulder is on the outside of the two of them. And Samsa is truly has devoted all of herself to motherhood. And it's not in this way that I think she feels resentment. This is what she wants to do. She spends all day, every day, naked on the couch with the naked baby on top of her, breastfeeding, just the two of them. She's whispering to the baby, and Boulder's totally on the outside. She actually doesn't have a moment alone with the baby until the baby's 2-3 months old. But a sense of resentment does grow between the two women, mostly on Boulder's side, as she desires the sex that they're not having. And she kind of falls in love with a woman that she sees, I think, comes to her food truck often. And she's like, this woman works at the museum. So she goes and kind of stalks around the museum trying to find her. They finally, after I think a few months of Boulder really desiring her, they meet up for drinks, and she starts a relationship with this woman, Anna, where they have sex, I think, every week. Boulder is really just using Anna, though she does desire her, it is purely for sex. And she ends up breaking it off with her by just completely ghosting her. And then she decides that she wants to go back to Samsa. They've been sleeping in separate rooms. Like, they're not really living as a couple anymore. And so one day she goes back to her place and she tries to bring in drinks for them. And she opens the door really slowly because she doesn't want to wake up the baby. It's Samsa and the baby in one room and Boulder in another room. She goes in there and Samsa is having sex with another woman, and I think importantly, another mother who has her child with her. A woman who clearly desires motherhood in a way that Boulder could never bring herself to. Their relationship ends. I don't think there's ever a confrontation or anything like that. It just cuts to the end of the book where Boulder is working on a different ship, washing dishes, and she's separated from Samsa and the baby. So that's really all there is to it in terms of what happens in the book. This is mostly a book that's taking place inside Boulder's head. It's a character study. It's like classic literary fiction, and so there isn't much in the way of plot, but what there is gorgeous prose, really well thought out and clever metaphors and similes. And this is also an impeccable translation from Catalan. It's just like incredible. You would never really know reading this that it was translated. And I might be saying that because I have just read a translation from Japanese, which is more difficult to translate into English, for sure. But it really stood out to me how well done this translation was. This book really is just about Boulder and her worldview and like being inside her head, and the way she views everything. Her lens can be very exhausting, but I think that it was a unique and insightful look into what she's like. Boulder spends her life floating, directionless, purposeless, and I think that she doesn't really know how to achieve what she wants in life. Like, I feel like her desires are often really in conflict with each other. And while I found her worldview to sometimes be a little bit exhausting in a way that was very interesting, but just like tired me out, what I really liked about her was how much meaning she assigns to everything. And sometimes often that meaning becomes something that she dislikes, but she just like thinks of everything as so full. I think this book challenged gender roles and parental roles and offered a unique perspective that you really come to understand, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. It definitely took me a minute to get into the narrative style and the way the prose is done, but once you're in, like, you're really in there, and it's kind of an intense experience, even though nothing huge happens in this book. And like, things in the way of plot, like, not very much time is spent on like the things that happen. It's mostly just time that you're spending in Boulder's mind. Her mind is just a very intense place to be. One thing I'll say about this is I am glad that it's the length that it is at 105 pages. I don't think I could have taken much more of being inside Boulder's brain, and I also found it like just a tiny little bit boring. I think this just wasn't exactly what I was in the mood for when I picked it up. I wanted something like Fernanda Melchor blurbs it on the back, and so I kind of thought it was going to be, she says it's a wild adventure, and I'm not exactly sure that describes it perfectly. That's not, like, that doesn't take away anything from this book. It just meant that I had set myself up to read something a little bit different than what this was, and so it could be just a little bit boring. I still devoured it in like a couple of hours. That's my one like little tiny complaint. If you're looking for something super fast paced, maybe don't pick this up right now. Overall, I found this book to be beautifully written. It's like gray and bleak and somber and kind of atmospheric. I think that the prose is just gorgeous. Though it's short, it really packs a punch. It's a fantastic piece of just like classic literary fiction, and I loved the way it explored relationships between women without like shying away from the depths of that and like the rawness of it. I think that this was just a beautifully done piece of literature. That is the end of the video. I'm so relieved to be returning these books to the library. It's like a weight off my fucking shoulders. And also I have a lot of books that I need to pick up that I cannot pick up until I return these books. I have to stop letting it get like this. It's often because my library doesn't really do fines. It's just fees. Once you've had books taken out for so long, they mark them as lost. Sometimes I don't get the push to read a book until it's like, hey, we're charging you $30 for this. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta get on that. So I'm happy to have gotten on it. You should go check out the Patreon, join the book club and Time to Read Jillian with us this month. Come and talk to us in the Discord. It's such a wonderful little community. If you don't want to, you don't have to, but like, I'm telling you, you really should. But I still appreciate all of your support on here. I love doing this. I love this community, and I'm not going to get sappy, even though I kind of am feeling a little bit sappy. I'm leaving. No vulnerability here. Goodbye.